All right, I think we have a lot of momentum up, and I think that the panel on getting technical to get results is certainly going to add to that momentum. So I think we're very, we're very pleased to have Mark Fudge as the chair of the panel. He's sitting in the middle of the group there. Mark, just raise your. Yeah. So, Mark's a full professor of public administration at California State University, San Bernardino. He teaches public budgeting and finance, program evaluation, public financial management. He is well published in peer-reviewed journals, and he is the chair of the section on public performance and management for the American Society for Public Administration, which is a co-sponsor of this conference, and has been for several years. So it's very important that we have that that relationship. Mark is also one of my former doctoral students. So we're very proud of him, and we have some other former doctoral students, Patria back there, and Aroon, the panel here. So it's nice to to sort of work with the new generation, who is in turn is educating another generation, and then the knowledge that we're building just can continue to gain significance as we go along. So we have generations in place here. And, that's what universities are all about, in fact. So Mark, leave it to you to introduce the panel participants. And,
sure.
Go ahead.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Well, first I'd like to say it's a pleasure to be here and part of this conference. As Professor Holzer mentioned, I'm one of his former doctoral students at Rutgers. He was the chair of my dissertation committee. So I have enormous amount of gratitude to Professor Holzer for all the support and advice, information, knowledge that he's passed along to myself and others. And from being here at this conference, I feel very invigorated. As I was talking to Aroon, a lot of times we go to conferences and we're kind of cast about on the outskirts because we talk about performance, and usually it's the last day of the conference that we have our panels in the afternoon, when maybe there's 2 or 3 people in the audience. So now it feels like we're home and we're in an environment of like-minded individuals. So it's definitely a pleasure to be here and be invigorated. And also, since I teach budgeting and finance, a lot of times, I can take the information from conferences like this, a lot of the information and the cool things that you all are doing in the field to the classroom. One of the projects my students do is put together a performance budgeting proposal. So I definitely want to talk to some of you more about that, about what you're doing, steal some of your ideas, and even have you participate with some of my classes. In particular, I think it's been very important for us to hear the information from some of the panelists on collaboration, the ones this morning and yesterday. Also, yesterday, the case of analytics by Jane Wiseman was very influential and important. I thought, it brought to home a lot of the ideas of, why we actually measure performance and the end result that we aim to accomplish. Also, with the presentation, Creating a Quality Data Pipeline, Megan Marie, I thought that one of the things that struck me was her emphasis on meeting your employees where they are and not trying to create something new that they're not aware of. A lot of times we talk to our students about meeting them where they are, so that rings true with me as well. And finally, I just want to mention that as a section chair of Public Performance and Management, this year we're again hosting the annual Mark Holzer Symposium. So please, I encourage everyone to submit their proposals to the upcoming ASPA conference for that symposium. Again, it'll be a friendly environment of like-minded individuals. The conference this year is in Anaheim, California, so It's nothing like going to Southern California any time of the year, especially in April. Here it might be a little colder and not as nice, let's say. But certainly, we encourage your participation in the conference and in the symposium. Again, it's April 3rd through the 7th in Anaheim, California. So in terms of this panel, getting technical to get results, we have some very good and interesting presentations to listen to on digital governance, integrating data, quantifying risk, and initiating results. I'll let the panelists introduce their papers in more detail, but we do have Mandeep, Kaundal, John Vaught, Dr. Raymond Keeler, and Dr. Aroon, Manoharan, who has been very influential in getting myself involved in government and the field of information and communication technologies. So if you would introduce your topic, and we'll go down the list in the order on the panel here on the presentation.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everybody. So I'm Mandeep Kaundal. I'm a senior performance manager with the Results Washington. So my job is to work with the different state agencies to develop performance measures and present the state performance to governor and state agencies. So in today's presentation, I'll be sharing with you the performance management system we are building statewide and some of the challenges we have and where we are going with our current model.
I'm Raymond Keeler. I manage the Quality and Performance Assurance Program for the United States Department of Energy's Legacy Management Program, which oversees 100 sites around the country. Today I'll be talking about the importance of including risk metrics in your overall performance measurements and show you a couple examples that we did to address risk in some of our programs.
Hello everybody, my name is Aroon Manoharan. I'm going to talk to you about how we measure the performance of e-governance from the E-Governance Institute. I'm an associate professor at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, and my areas of research are e-government, strategic planning, performance measurement. So largely it's on public management. Thank you.
Hey, I'm John Vaught. I'm the IT project portfolio manager for Loudoun County. I'm going to be talking about initiating results, and really I'm going to be talking about gaining clarity around outcomes and working with different government departments to do that.
All right, thank you. So, Dr. Manoharan, you're first up the bat.
Thank you. So welcome to the conference. Again, it's great to be at the conference. I still remember being at the first PPMRN conference at Rutgers University. I was a student there. I think it was 2008, so it's nice to see. It is always an exciting conference because, as I was telling to my co-panelists, we are always, whoever is interested in performance measurement is always it's always isolated in every organization. So it's nice to bring everybody, create a common platform so that you can share best cases, stories of performance measurement. So today, I'm going to talk to you about how we measure the performance of e-government, which is one of my research interests. So we at the E-Governance Institute, this is an institute at the NCPP at Suffolk University. Earlier it was at Rutgers University, and I've been associated with the institute since 2005. And we largely measure the performance of e-government across the world, and also at the US levels. So before we get into the performance measurement aspect, just a quick introduction to e-government. E-government is the application of information technology to government. There are a lot of definitions of e-government. A very broad definition is the use of IT to deliver government services, integrate, transact government businesses, and enable citizen participation in government. The use of e-government has got implications for services, improving the services of government, improving the government information that is communicated to the citizens, and also transforming the relationship between government and citizens. So really with e-government, there is a promise of 24/7 access to government throughout the year. And why is e-government important? Because a typical government agency has got a lot of departments working as silos. They're just working as islands, and there's really not much interaction taking place. So so e-government is a good platform to integrate all these systems. This is just an example of a county government from the Midwest. And you see that they're all, islands, and they end up becoming their own fiefdoms. And so what happens is, they all work in silos. There's isolation, there's division in terms of the work being done. There's fragmentation of work, so there's duplication of efforts. And so really there's a lot of inefficiency. So that's where e-government can come in and integrate the systems, integrate all these systems, and thereby improve the performance of government. So and when I teach e-government, I teach strategic planning. There's no way I can teach these topics without touching on performance measurement. So e-government, performance measurement, strategic planning. I make sure that I emphasize all three topics when I teach. E-government, conceptually, it's one of the trends in public management. Earlier, we had managerialism, where the focus of the society was on experts and managers, the people with the expertise, the professional knowledge. And then you had re-engineering, which is the application of business process re-engineering in government. Then you had the reinventing movement, which was really headed by Vice President Al Gore, which resulted in the Government Performance Results Act. And then that resulted in performance measurement being mandated at the federal level, and also it became a guide to performance measurement at the state and local levels. So all this really culminated in the introduction to e-government. So e-government has a lot of benefits. There's increased accountability to citizens, greater access to information, there's more efficient, effective government. There's a transformation in the way government conducts business. And the big promise is converting or transforming the government from a bureaucratic paradigm to an e-government paradigm. I just wanted to share some definitions. When e-government first started being conceptualized in the early 2000s, the potential was to optimize the internal, external functions of government, transform the way in which interactions were going to take place, and also provide new skills to improve public services. And there's many concepts. It's also called as digital government. There's also e-governance, which includes e-government, one-way transaction, one-way delivery of services, and also e-democracy, which is citizen participation in government. I also wanted to share this because a lot of us think e-government might have started in the early 2000s, but then the federal government has actually implemented a lot of legislation way before the early 2000s that actually led up to this e-government act and to the Office of E-Government and Information Technology. For example, you had the Paperwork Reduction Act. Again, all this with the goal of improving the performance of government through technology. The Computer Security Act to improve the security and privacy of sensitive information in government. The Klinger-Cohen Act, which really started the idea or introduced the idea of the CIO, the Chief Information Officers. The Government Paperwork Elimination Act of '98, and then you had the E-Government Act of 2002. Right? So this is just to show you how much, what the emphasis placed by the federal government on the introduction of information technology. And then you had the GIPRA, the Government Performance Results Act, where again, the focus was on improving the performance by cutting down waste, and e-government was an important aspect to improving performance, linking it with strategic planning and performance reporting. It was also e-government was an important aspect or an important area of focus in the President's management agenda by President George W. Bush. And this led to the Office of E-Government and Information Technology, which really helped to streamline the e-government services or initiatives that was happening across the country. So They were also, academically, the study of e-government really started off in the early 2000s, where there were a lot of conceptual models of e-government, which was introduced. You had the United Nations, the 5-stage model, which starts with emerging presence, enhanced presence, interactive, transactional, network presence. And you had the Moon's 5-stage model, that is very similar to this UN model, but has political participation at the end. So really, e-government is an intersection of multiple areas, and it is important that we understand the factors that help in the performance of e-government, in making sure that e-government realizes its potential. Now, why do we need to measure the performance of e-government? Is because for all its potential, there's a high rate of failure of e-government projects. Any idea as to how many projects, e-government projects, are successful? 25%. Yes, that's very close. about a third. Only a third of e-government projects are actually, they've been recorded as being successful. So more than half the projects fail. And I'm talking about e-government. I'm not sure how much it would be in the private IT projects in the private sector, but when you talk of government sector, the public sector, there are a lot of reasons for the failure of e-government projects. Because first of all, the goal definition, it's very vague. The complex structure of government, because of interactions from multiple dimensions, technical, managerial, political, cultural, legal dimensions. The planning of for example, the strategic planning for e-government and IT projects is very much influenced by the electoral process. There's also very less sharing of best practices as compared to the private sector. And finally, you have the legal and regulatory issues. So there's a lot of failure of. So this really got me started to think about why is it that public projects fail or e-government projects fail. One major reason is also because we don't have proper definitions of what are the success of e-government. For example, some of the hard measures of e-government success could be cost-benefit analysis, benchmarks. The soft measures could be improved decision-making, customer satisfaction, employee productivity. And also, it's not just about project failures. You also have system failures. Sometimes everything, you have everything in place, but still the system, the technology, that breaks down. And sometimes you have user failure because the citizens are not able to really integrate the e-government initiatives, or they're just not comfortable with the services provided. There's an internal aspect and an external aspect to e-government. So this is where the work of the e-Governance Institute comes in. The e-Governance Institute, it is a part of the National Center for Public Performance at Suffolk University. The mission of the e-Governance Institute is to explore how the internet and information technologies continue to impact the performance of government, and how e-government, and to measure how e-government can foster new, deeper citizen involvement with the government governing process. So what we do here is we gather and share knowledge, information, and data in order to increase the understanding of e-governance, and also how it can strengthen the fundamental partnership between the public and the private sectors. Some of the projects that the e-Governance Institute has been involved in since 2003 are the US Municipalities e-Governance Surveys, the US States e-Governance Surveys, the Global e-Governance Surveys. We've also done e-governance surveys in specific countries, in the country of in Czech Republic. We've also conducted studies in Bulgaria. These are again, the city of Sofia contacted us to implement e-governance studies. The city of Czech contacted us. And so, and these are also, what you see here are all the partners, the research partners. So we have partners across the world in conducting these studies. So really what we do is we measure the performance of e-government based on the website performance, which is again not, it's just one aspect of e-government performance, but it's a very important aspect. How does the website perform, right? The website is the first basic step in e-government, and it still remains a very important aspect of technology in government. It is, in spite of all the social media and latest technologies, The website is the landing page. So it's really important that you have a good accessible website. So that's our main focus, because we are measuring how citizens perceive e-government. And this is primarily through the website, the official website of the city or state. So this is again just a slide on our international work. This is a report on the Prague e-governance study. This is a photo of where we've conducted these global e-governance studies, and we award the top 5 best performing cities. That's a picture of Professor Holzer giving an award to the representative from the city of Seoul. We also our studies have also been used by the World E-Government Organization, which is a platform for sharing e-government services. And then this photo is a photo of me and my colleague Jim Melitsky, who's a professor at Marist, but also worked with the E-Governance Institute. This is, we are having a press conference in Sofia where we are introducing the results of the studies that we conducted among Bulgarian cities. Right. So, I just wanted to talk about the latest survey, the e-governance survey. Now, what I have here is, I'm going to distribute this book. This is a previous e-government study, which was done in 2015, and we've conducted one study in 2018-19, which will be released soon. So the global e-governance study is a study of how cities, large municipalities perform in terms of e-governance across the world. What is unique about the study is we evaluate the website, the official website of the city, based on about 106 indicators. And we do this, we measure the city's website in their native language. So we're really seeing or measuring how the local population perceives their official websites. So what we do is we collect the way we identify the large cities is we collect the top 100 wired nations using data from the International Telecommunication Union. And then we identify the largest city by population in each nation. So this is how we come with the sample for our study. And our assumption is that the largest city, is a representative of how the nation performs in terms of municipal governance or local e-government. So the index that we use is the largest, it's by far the most comprehensive index for measuring e-government performance in terms of websites. It has 106 indicators. It is categorized divided in 5 different categories, which is privacy, security, usability, content, services, and citizen social engagement. So this gives you just a quick idea of what we focus on in these 5 categories. In terms of privacy, we look at does the website have a privacy policy? And then does the privacy policy inform the users on how well their data is being used and why they use the data, what kind of data is being collected, are third parties involved? And also the privacy policy, basically the privacy policy should reduce any fears of misuse of data by the government or by the data collection agency. So this is what we measure. Again, we measure everything from a citizen perspective. Then we measure the usability of a website. How usable, how user-friendly is the website in terms of the design, the branding, the logo. Is the website, do they have targeted audience links? And is there proper search capabilities? Then we look at content. We measure the content because content is really important. There's no point in having a very good website if you don't have the most updated information. And we measure in terms of do they have the right data, the most updated content. And then we look at services in terms of transactional services. How are users able to submit requests online? Are they able to buy services, register themselves online? And then finally, we look at citizen social engagement, where we are measuring to the opportunities, or how many opportunities does the website give for citizens to participate in the governing process. Right? So now I want to introduce, so based on this, we measured the performance of the top cities across the world in 2018, 2019, sorry. And the results will be released soon and later this fall. These are the top cities in digital governance. And you can see their overall score, and you can see their score in the 5 different categories. Seoul ranked first, continuing its best performance all these years, followed by the city of Madrid, and then Yerevan in Armenia, followed by Auckland and Paris. Right? This is out of a score of 100. So this is the top 20 cities. I can again come back to this during the discussion. This is the results of the top 20 cities from the past 3 surveys. So again, Seoul has continued to rank first. The city of New York has, the ranking has decreased over the years, but the score has been relatively the same. In fact, the score, if you look at New York's score in 2013, it scored 66. And 2018, it scored 68. So it has increased slightly, but there are a lot of other cities, global cities, that have improved their performance and have come into the top 10 ranking cities. So this is really giving us a wealth of information. As you can see from the report, we have published a lot of articles from this. Mark Fudge was also involved in the surveys. So, we have about 8 to 9 researchers as part of the E-Governance Institute, and we have many publications that came out of this. I've got the list of books over there, if you're interested, all with the guidance of Professor Mark Holzer. So what is interesting is this is the average e-governance score from 2003 to the latest e-governance survey. So as you can see, the score, the average score of all the cities went up in 2009, then it dipped slightly, and then it's again increasing. So this kind of resembles the S-shaped innovation curve, right? Where if you're familiar with the S-shaped innovation curve, any new initiative is rapidly, it becomes rapidly popular and adopted by a lot of agencies, organizations, and then it plateaus over time. In terms of categories, the category in citizen participation has always ranked less compared to usability and content, and so which shows that there's still less emphasis on citizen participation in terms of e-governance. Which is, e-governance, if you think of it, is the real focus of e-governance should be the cities, but then cities should be on the citizens. But cities have consistently given less importance to the citizen participation aspect of these websites. We also look at the digital divide. The digital divide, which we define it as the difference between the cities from OECD nations and non-OECD nations. The digital divide has slightly decreased over time, as you can see from these results. And one interesting finding that we came with all the studies is the cluster. We did a cluster analysis, and which showed that over time, the cities, they form different clusters. We always think of 2 or 3 clusters, but we identified 4 clusters of cities which became more prominent in 2015, as you can see from the 2 charts. So we've named them digitally mature, digitally moderate, digitally minimum, and digitally marginal cities. But
1 minute.
One more. But what's interesting is the number of cities which are digitally mature has increased in 2015. So really, there's a lot of findings that have come from all these studies, from all the researchers. One important study is there are distinct stages of e-government growth across the cities. Cities primarily, they go through different phases of e-government, and the cities also follow an S-shaped curve in terms of e-governance development. We also found some influential factors that have, that are very important for e-government performance. At the national level, it is the GDP and the regional competition, whereas at the local level, it's the leadership that is really important. The presence of a CIO and the role of the CIO, the form of government, the education level of the inhabitants of the population of the city, and also the usability of the website is an important factor. Thank you again for listening to my presentation. This is my email address. If you have any questions on the survey or the performance measures that we use, and if you want to suggest. We are also open to your suggestions because one thing is this performance index was created in 2003, 2005. But again, today e-government or technology in government is moving beyond e-government. We have AI, we have smart cities. So we have to actually innovate our performance measures. How do you measure a smart city? How do you define and how do you measure a smart city, and how do you measure AI in cities? So this requires constant conversation and improvement of the performance measures. Thank you.
We're in the law building right now. If we were to leave the law building and go over to the systems engineering department or the business college, they will tell you that whenever you've got a program, big or small, it doesn't matter, there are always 4 primary drivers. The first one is something they call performance. For us, it's a little bit more narrow definition than what we would generally call performance. Here we're talking about the inherent quality of the product or service that we're providing. How good a job we fill in that pothole, how many potholes we fill. The next driver is schedule. How much time are you going to give me to fill in those potholes? You give me more time, I can do a better job or can do more potholes. Less time, maybe you're not going to get quite as good a product. Then there's cost. How much money are you willing to pay for this? You give me more money, I can give you more bells and whistles in the product, or I can do more of it. You're going to give me less time, maybe not so good of a job. And then finally, the fourth one is something they call risk. Now, there's lots of different definitions of risk. Here, what we're talking about is the probability of achieving those other 3 things as we promised. Can we do it under all scenarios? What happens if there's a hurricane and a pandemic at the same time? Are we going to be able to achieve everything? Now, if we go back to the public administration literature and look at how we measure performance, what I have seen, and in talking to many of you in past conferences, the literature really tends to focus on this concept of inherent performance. How do we measure that? There's a little bit out there about how we measure schedule or cost, but those start off as quantitative values, so they're a little bit more straightforward to measure. But what you practically don't see is how to measure risk from a public administration performance measurement standpoint. Now, this is a problem. And it's a problem because unrealized risk has a tendency to artificially inflate performance measurements, the overall performance measurements. Now, as an example to illustrate what I mean by that, suppose you're driving down the road and you're coming up to either a red light or a stop sign. And you think to yourself, I could run that stop sign. There's a little bit of a risk involved. I could get in a wreck or get a ticket. You know what? I think I'm going to take the risk. And you just blow through the stop sign. Incidentally, that is my car. What happens if the risk is unrealized? In other words, if you're lucky and you don't get in a wreck or get a ticket, what have you done to your performance measurements? Well, your inherent performance really hasn't changed that much. You still made it from point A to point B. But your schedule performance has improved. You did it in less time. And your cost performance improved as well. You didn't use as much fuel because you weren't slowing down, stopping, waiting, and then starting back up. So if you look at just those 3 metrics, overall, it looks like your performance has improved. And you say, great, I think I'm going to run red lights and stop signs from now on. Well, you know what's going to happen. Sooner or later, your luck is going to run out. You're going to realize the risk. And as soon as you do, all those gains that you have are gone. Now, I think any of us that have been in the workforce more than a week or so have probably seen examples of this. You get a new supervisor, a new elected official, a coworker that comes in and they take a risk and they get lucky. And what do? Oh, we praise them for the great work they've done, and then we promote them up and they become our boss or something. And we think, you know, I could have done the same thing, but I wasn't willing to take that risk. Now, in my organization, I realized that we need to incorporate risk measurements into these overall performance metrics. We had a problem in my organization. I work for the Department of Energy. I'm a contractor to the Department of Energy. And up until about 2.5 months ago, I worked for the Nevada National Security Site. If you're not familiar with the Nevada National Security Site, that's the test site where we used to blow up nuclear bombs. Now, in the process of blowing up nuclear bombs, not only did we turn the desert of Nevada into something that looks like the surface of the moon, but we also created a lot of contamination. And our job was to go in there and clean up this contamination. And in the process of doing that, we collect a lot of environmental samples, soil samples, water samples, and the like. And we send them to laboratories around the country for analysis. Well, a few years ago, it was time to renew the contracts with those laboratories. And we're dealing with taxpayer dollars here, so you can't just pick somebody. You have to actually go through an evaluation process that looks at their performance. And we had a scoring process where we looked at those factors that we talked about, the inherent quality, schedule, and budget, without looking at risk. And our contracts people came back and said they were going to award the contract to these 2 particular laboratories. Well, our technical people who were more familiar with those laboratories said, no, those aren't the laboratories we want to contract with. They're terrible risks. Well, our contract people said, what do you mean? We base this on the numbers that you gave us. They're the winners. Well, we couldn't just ignore that and do what the technical people wanted. We had to award them the contracts because that's what the performance measurements said were the best. But we were nervous about it. We had some contingency plans in place. And it was a good thing we did because 6 months later, one of those laboratories went bankrupt. And about 6 to 8 months after that, the other laboratory went bankrupt as well. And if we hadn't have had our contingency plans in place, we would have been in a world of hurt. So the next time that we went out for bids, we thought, you know, we have got to incorporate this concept of risk into our performance measurements somehow. So we were left with 2 big questions. One was, were there any data available on unrealized risk? And if there were data available, how could we use that? Well, figure out if there was any data available. If you look at a typical contract between a government agency and a subcontractor, there's first of all the statement of work or the product specs. What are you going to provide for the government? Then there's schedule requirements and budget requirements. And then oftentimes, not always, but in our case it was, there are quality assurance requirements or standards that the government says, when you provide this work, you must meet these international standards. Well, if you compare that to the drivers that we talked about from the business school, you'll notice there's pretty much a one-to-one relationship between those, with the exception of maybe that last one that says quality assurance requirements or standards. Well, what are these standards? If you go to the American Society for Quality, they say that quality assurance is the collection of planned or systematic actions necessary to provide adequate confidence that a product or service meets its intended purpose or fulfills customer expectations, which is a long-winded way of saying that quality assurance standards are merely the things that we need to do in order to reduce risk to performance, schedule, and budget. Now, the nice thing about these standards are they already exist. They tend to be out there and they're industry specific. There's an industry standard for nuclear industry, one for environmental. In our case, there was one for laboratories. And these standards are defined by those industry experts. It is the nuclear scientists that have said, this is what we need to do to reduce risk in our arena. In our case, it was the laboratory scientists that had put together the laboratory standard that said, this is what laboratories have to do in order to reduce risk. So we as government or analysts or public administrators, we don't have to figure out what represents risk for these agencies. They've already done it themselves. Now, typically when a government agency mandates quality requirements, what they will do is go out on a periodic basis, usually an annual basis, and they will do audits to check to see if people are complying with these standards. Now, no organization is perfect. There's always mistakes that they make. So these audit teams will go forth. They'll get a list of all the things that they did wrong. They'll put it in a nice audit report, ask the contractor to fix them. And then that audit report will go and sit on a shelf forever. Nobody will look at it again. But we stopped and thought, those reports, if these standards are designed to reduce risk, and in these cases we have a list of violations of those standards, that must be an indicator that those organizations are taking some level of risk. Why can't we use those reports to go out and figure out what risk they are taking? Now, we thought about that and we thought, yes, we can do that, but there was a major problem with doing that. And that is the way audits are conducted. They're not always conducted the exact same way. The government may send 2 people for an afternoon to go do an assessment at one place, and they may send 14 people for 2 weeks to a laboratory in South Carolina where there's a lot of good seafood. And so if you're spending more time auditing an organization, you're going to find more things, not because they're doing worse, but simply because you're doing a better job auditing them. So we realized that we couldn't just use the raw scores from these audit reports. We needed to use a statistical method to normalize the field. So what we did, we went out and we had 555 audit reports of 55 different laboratories around the country. And we decided to normalize it using just simple ordinary least squares regression. We took the results of the audit reports that told us how long the audit reports were, how many people were on the teams, the scope and those factors, and we just simply put it into our model as independent variables. And then we assigned dummy variables to the contractors that we were looking at, the laboratories, and those became our fixed effect variables. Now, when you do this, and you do your regression model, you come out with slopes. The slopes of the independent variables tell us what the auditing process contributed, but the slopes of those fixed effects variables then become a measure of the risk-taking behavior of the audited organizations. They became a measure that was adjusted based on the average number of issues found in these assessments. When we did that, we did this blindly. We had a list of all these laboratories. I just grabbed kind of 7 at random here. And we did a ranking. The raw ranking is based on the average number of issues found in these audit reports. So you get one ranking there. But then we ran the model and readjusted those rankings based on the model score. And you'll notice that there's a difference there between the two. Then we did we said this was a blind study. We went back and went back to the technical people and said, okay, how do these compare with their results? And what we found was, first of all, a lot of this data was based on laboratories up through the Recovery Act. After the Recovery Act, a lot of laboratories went bankrupt around the country. And what we found were the laboratories that consistently had these lower scores were the ones that were going bankrupt. So it gave us some confidence in the model that it really was indicating some level of risk. We also took it back to our technical people and they said, yes, those are the bad laboratories. We know they're the poor performing laboratories. So it gave us a lot of confidence. It didn't tell us a lot that we didn't already know or intuitively understand. Our technical people already understood who were the bad labs, but it was just a feeling, and we couldn't really base any awards, contract awards, on a feeling. But now we have a statistical mathematical model that we could use that showed the same results as their gut feelings. wanted to do this again to see if we work on another program. We did it for a totally different program that looked at generators of radioactive and hazardous waste around the country. And again, we followed the same methodology, and we found the same consistent results. That the organizations that the auditors consistently understood were bad but didn't have a really good mathematical model, this now gave us a tool that we could use to base those assumptions on and make critical assumptions or decisions. And so with that, just kind of summarize, past performance may be a poor indicator of future performance if we don't calculate or bring risk into those calculations. Quality assurance audit results, if you have them available, are a source of risk data, but you need to normalize that for different ways that audits are conducted. And we did that using an ordinary least squares fixed effects model. And we're going to save questions till afterwards, but I will answer one question that usually comes up, and that is, how big are those holes? Here's a nice map here. Sedan crater, which is one of the larger one out there. This is the size of the crater. I don't know if you can see that there. So those are some pretty big holes out there. And with that, I'll turn it over to the next panelist.
Thank you.
So how many of you feel like you're pretty handy around the house? Anyone? Anyone? Okay, we're not around a real handy group here. And that's great because I am one of you. My wife is actually pretty handy, and I'm very happy about that. She gets all the tools at Christmas, and I try to stay away from it as far as possible. Because here's the problem, is that I can just imagine myself, for example, laying underneath the sink, staring up at a pipe, water spraying all over me, and my kids with their smartphones making this video viral in no time at all. Right? I know the last panelists have talked about change is hard, and most of the stuff that we're talking about really is change. Initiatives, projects, any of these things, we're trying to introduce change. And often when we're doing this, we can think of a couple ways it can go right. There are a whole lot of ways it can go wrong. And a lot of the people we work with, as I mentioned, seen a whole lot of ways it can go wrong. They've been there, they've been a part of it. And I want to talk about one of the things that we're trying to do where I work at Loudoun County, just outside the DC metro area, is we're trying to gain clarity around the outcomes before we start the projects. And honestly, one of the biggest problems I've seen is that a lot of people, when I ask, what is the outcome, what is the result you're looking for, they think they know. And they'll give me an answer that they think is pretty good, but the problem is it's just not a great outcome. It doesn't help us really get to the result that we're shooting for. And I'll give you a couple examples, and we're going to talk about 52 ways to, no, I'm just kidding, 3 ways. I am cognizant I'm standing between them and lunch, so we're going to keep it down to 3. 3 ways to gain clarity around your outcomes. So for example, one of the ways is to make sure you're actually solving a real problem or you're gaining obvious business value. And that's actually harder than it seems. I think getting clarity is one of the most difficult things that we can do. For instance, I was talking with one department and they had a technical request. I said, tell me what you guys want to do. And they said, we want to add audio visual equipment to some vehicles. And to them, that was the outcome. And honestly, it's measurable. Did you put the equipment on these trucks? And we can say yes or no. I mean, it's a pretty easy measurement. It's 0, 1, right? Yes, no, true, false. Pretty easy measurement. But the problem is it to them, they could kind of imagine some value around it. But how did that really, what problem was that really solving? Right? I think that's one of the first things that we need to work on is what value does it bring or what's the real problem? And so he was a very friendly guy. He allowed me to come in and say, why are you adding this audiovisual equipment? took it well, he said, because we want to record things, right? And he thought, maybe this guy doesn't really get what audio visual is. Maybe he's not sure what's going on here. And I said, no. Tell me why you want to record things. And we just kept going down this path. And he says, well, eventually we got to a place because the people are out driving it, and we're not really tracking them. We're not trying to be big brother or big sister. We're liberated, big brother, big sister. We're really trying to help them when we get into rough situations or accidents, right? We want to be there. And I said, that's great. Why do you want to be? We just kept going. And eventually we got to this point where he said, we have about 100 accidents a year. And we want to reduce the number of accidents. I was like, there you go, right? Reducing the number of accidents from 100 to something else is awesome. You are solving a problem. Are you with me on that? Can you see the difference? And I said, so if you spent all this money, we'll just say a couple $100,000, and it went from 100 to 99, did you get what you wanted? He goes, well, maybe not, right? And if you got to, what if you shot for 50, from 100 to 50? He says, that seems like a good goal. So we went from what he thought was clarity around an outcome or an objective to really finding the actual problem that we're trying to solve. Can you see the difference? Especially if you can say we're going from here to there. That means there's movement, there's something happening. We actually got to it, and I said it's okay if you don't get 50. Then you can find the gap. You can figure out what's going on. But maybe the audiovisual equipment isn't going to give you the most bang for the buck. Maybe you had a day on to the training. There's things that you can do. It gives people direction and excitement about really trying to solve something that's real, right? Number one, find the real problem. Find the real value in there. And sometimes it's a little bit harder in government work because we're not necessarily always talking about return on investment. Maybe there's just value of the investment. Find the problem. Find the real value. Number two, it should be quantifiable. So I know yesterday we talked about, and I just went blank on the word. There's a word that's a great word. I love the word. I wrote the word down because I figured I might. Collaboration, it's a beautiful word. Maybe it needs to be a little bit more beautiful in my mind here. Collaboration, it's a wonderful thing. I did have someone come to me, and it's a wonderful tool. I love collaboration. It makes me want to do a group hug and sing Kumbaya. Collaboration's a beautiful thing. But when this person came to me and he said, one of our goals, one of our outcomes is collaboration, I go, awesome. If I come to you in 6 months and ask, did you get more collaboration, what are you going to tell me? He goes, I have no idea, right? It needs to be quantifiable. It needs to not be abstract. Collaboration is a beautiful tool. But if you came to me and you said, hey, I got a state-mandated report that's going to require 3 divisions to get together and build it, that's wonderful, right? The collaboration is a tool, but the real outcome is something that is real, that exists. Collaboration is a tool, not an outcome. Are you with me? Number 1, find the real problem or the value. Number 2, make sure it's concrete. Make sure it's measurable. The third one is make sure it's a real outcome or a result and not an activity or a task. And this is really difficult because we do this all the time thinking it's an outcome as well. I was with another group, and we're talking through the outcomes and talking about what's going on. They said, we want to add 2 trainers. And I was like, that's wonderful. Because they can imagine the value of trainers. Everybody in here can think, well, unless you've known some bad trainers, most people can look at trainers and think they're going to add value, but really I had to say, no, trainers are a cost. Really, they're really a cost. That's an activity. Training is an activity. It's not a result. What do you want those trainers to do? This is running down that why path again until you get something obvious. What do you want those trainers to do? And they do the, audio-visual equipment is to record. Trainers train people. I was like, tell me what you want them to train for. And eventually we got to the point where they said, We want all new employees to have this skill and this knowledge, these two very specific things. And I was like, that's beautiful. Yeah, maybe that's 2 trainers, maybe it's a couple other things. But they had an outcome that people could get excited about, that brought people towards working for the same goal. If you don't have that, people are going to be running in a lot of different directions. I've heard outcomes of people saying, like, we want to have 5 meetings. We want to have 5 panels. Well, that's wonderful. Why? Run down the why path. Find the obvious value. A good example of this, and just general, another way to think about it if you want a good illustration is someone goes in and says, I want to build a house. We think we know what a house is. We think that's a concrete thing, but it's really an abstract thing because I'm going to hand you a hammer, I'm going to hand you a hammer, we're going to hand these guys a hammer, and we're all going to run off. And all I really wanted was a 3-bedroom ranch, and we got this monstrosity leaky thing because everybody's building something different. When instead, if we had just come in and said, you know, I want the floor to be level, I want it to be 97% airtight, I want the roof to have no leaks, right? Give me something that has obvious business value or solves a real problem, number 1. Number 2, concrete, measurable. Number 3, it's a real outcome, not a task. I think if you do those things, you're really on your way to starting off towards the end. Everybody knows what they're trying to achieve. It's going to provide focus. It's going to provide transparency. It should drive engagement because if you know what the real problem is that you're trying to solve, people can get excited about it. Listen, I come from the technology world, and there's not a lot of people that, when you're talking outside of the IT department, when we say, hey, we're going to spend $500,000 on this, integrating these 2 systems, they don't go, woo, love it, right? But if we come in and we say, hey, we're going to reduce you guys from having to type things in 3 times, 50 times a year, they might go, I can live with that. I might get excited about that. All right, number 1, anybody remember number 1? Find the real problem, find the real value. Number 2, measurable, concrete. Number 3, real outcomes, not activities or tasks. Thank you. You guys have been great.
Okay, so our director, Inger Brink, she was supposed to come and present this, so she had to call. Because of health reason, she couldn't come, and I'm a poor substitute for her presentation skill, but I'll give it my best shot. So our intent today is to share with you, we are developing a performance management model in Washington State, and as a statewide model, what does it look like? And I'll also share with you from where we are evolving some of the past lessons learned. And still, we are in our first year into this model. So I think we still have quite a bit of work to do, but I'll share with you our journey. So on the overview of Results Washington and Result Washington system, so I'll spend maybe around 5 minutes here just to kind of set a context and give you a little background. And performance management, that's where I'll spend probably next 10 minutes. So overview is why do we exist? So in terms of our Results Washington existence, so it matters a lot to know where your organization sit in terms of bigger scheme of states organization structure. So, so our Results Washington office reports to Deputy Chief of Staff. So we are literally within the governor's office. And we work with over 50 different state agencies. Each agency have their own version of performance shop. So our goal is to work with those agencies, develop statewide measures, and then show the performance that how state is operating. So I'll get to it, like how does that exchange looks like between us and between 50 different state agencies. And the people on the first row you see, these are Washingtonian who actually participated in our performance review. So performance review, we call it result review meeting. We have a monthly result review meeting with the governor where we also bring in our performance measures and we bring in Washingtonian to kind of set a context who's being affected by this particular issues. And even when we work on our climate or environment related measures, well, it is usually collaboration between 5 to sometimes even 10 different agencies. So Washington, we have a really long history of having a performance shop under, governor. So we have a lot of pride in that, and that pride also have a cost too. I think Ann and Ron addressed that. With the change in the leadership, your vision or mission get kind of revised, and your structure get kind of, you have to restructure it. What you are measuring, that also get evaluated. So we have been going through several iterations. So under Governor Inslee, now we are Results Washington. So in Results Washington, our mission is to create a data-driven, responsive, and human-centered government. So I'll get to it all these three, human-centered, data-driven, and responsive. What does that mean for us and how we are trying to kind of bring that into our model. So in terms of our system, so this doesn't do full justice, but I'm gonna explain it to you. So this was the system we used for 4 years. So what this is that Governor Inslee has a broader 5 goals. And under those 5 goals, we work with the 50 agencies. It took us over a year to come up with an outcome measure and then leading indicators. So we ended up with a system with 192 measures. On each measure, we have basically the target, minimum 5-year trend. That's how we were evaluating the performance. So we operated with this model for 4 years. Now, some of the lesson learned from this model was, over the year, this model became a little too rigid and a little too automated kind of system, because each of these individual measures, they represented each individual agency's priorities. So these measures were also being tracked by Result Washington in Governor's office, but they were also being tracked within each agencies too. By the time we review it, these measures had already been reviewed 2-3 times within agency too. And then the other issue we had, lesson learned from this model, is that even though we have division like I can't see the color I put on, I think is orange or something. So that's the outcome measure on the top. These are leading indicator. When you look into the layer, we couldn't tell which one is the outcome measure, which one is the leading indicator. Because these feedback came from different agencies. We group them together. If there's let's say, for example, topic is homelessness. Our outcome measure is reducing the number of homeless people in Washington. Any other indicator that related with that outcome measure, we group them together into one. So now the challenge with that is we ended up with all sorts of disparate measures. We have process measure in there, we have input measure in there. Some of the version I haven't even seen. So you ended up with a wide variety of measure without a focus there. So from here, we are trying to evolve. Part of our involvement is that how do you leverage your current playing field? So in order to work with the 50 different agencies, they have their own performance shop. How do we collaboratively work? So in order to do that, we also have to define what does performance looks like for governor's office. Because a lot of these are operational measures. They are already being reviewed. So we wanted to kind of create a filter that whatever we review, that represents the whole state, all Washingtonians. So we come up with this. So now we have on the top row, we have these 5 governor's goals, and then we have these 20 different topics. Under each topic, we call it outcomes, where each topic is turned into a dashboard. So we call it outcome measure dashboard. But basically what this is, each outcome will have 3 or 4 leading drivers, or it doesn't matter, you call it indicator or measures. So on those, so we develop all these outcome measure in collaboration with the agencies. So some of the guardrail we set to develop a statewide performance management system. Number one, we are going to pursue the topic that is cross-agency collaboration, not individual agencies, because that's already being tracked. So I mentioned homelessness. That's the collaborative work of 6 different agencies. Re-entry or infant mortality, any measure we put in here, they expand from 5 to 10 different state agencies. So one, we kept that in mind. Number two, we kept in mind that what does that performance looks like from Washingtonians' point of view. In the past, we have created very elaborative interactive dashboard. We have created scorecard. They made a lot of sense from operational point of view. But in Washington, we are already measuring operational performance in a few different areas. So we are now sitting at a little higher level. And so on these, so on what does this look like to Washingtonian is, so right now we are doing user testing. So what I'm going to, I'll show you guys this, what does this look like. So this is broadly the model we are operating with. Each outcome measure is basically this topic. So each outcome measure, we will have a 90-minute meeting. So with the governor every month is a televised event. We bring in a Washingtonians who speaks to how they are impacted. Then our agencies present what are they doing to help them. Usually during that meeting, we found out a lot of kind of either overlaps or also kind of missing areas that nobody is addressing it. And I'm going to share with you a couple examples that came out of these meetings that we are finding out that none of the agencies doing it, or in some area, more than one agency is doing it. But when we think in terms of our Washingtonians, they get a whole lot different picture. Not only they have to kind of navigate through a bunch of different agencies to get the same service, but also they can tell what state is doing, because our performances dashboards are usually developed in terms to make sense to state employees. So we push the outcome measure in the result review with the governor. So result review is our terminology for a performance meeting. After that meeting, right away, we have 45-minute session. We call it post-debrief. So we are only 6 months in experimenting with the post-review debrief. In that meeting, what we do is that we capture the momentum that happened in the 90-minute meeting, talk to the agencies, what are the areas they were missing, and we try to get a few commitment, and also like how we can bring in other different agency to kind of redistribute some of the expertise to get to it. So I think we are 3 outcome measure in that we have a commitment, and then we are pursuing performance improvement from that point of view. Whatever come out of that meeting, we also share that in a cabinet meeting. So in Washington State, we have a large cabinet meeting, and then we have small cabinet meeting. Agencies are divided into 2 categories. So these agencies who have participated in result review, usually their agency director report out that how they are dealing with the homelessness issue, what are they doing to, let's say, tackle infant mortality, or what kind of support they need. So that goes into cabinet meeting, and then we have a separate group, which is our deputy directors meeting. So that's more like a COO for our state agencies. So they are the one who have quite a bit hands-in into the operational side of government. So we work with them. Sometimes we have way more resources or expertise in one agency, and then there we kind of try to get a commitment if they can help out another agency or if they can pitch in. So we formalize our collaboration there. So the very last is the results Washington assistant or agency effort. I'll go a little bit more into it in the next few slides. What does that assistance looks like? Usually what comes out of our result review meeting or the cabinet meeting is that we identify area where there's a gap, but no one is addressing it because each agency have their own mission or vision. So our agency brings in those different experts in. So I have 3 minutes left, so I'm gonna walk you through briefly. This is our first cut at the dashboard. So by no means this is a final product. We are going through a user testing. But what we are trying to capture here is the first part is the customer story. Second part is the drivers that will affect the outcome. The very last part, the bottom piece, is the what state agencies are doing to improve that outcome. So you can find basically hyperlink to particular program, but served by different agencies. And on the side, these are the same basic chart we have in the past. You'll have a 5-year trend. You have a target. So in terms of data driven, we are also kind of putting some guardrail here. What does data looks like from state performance point of view? And I'm gonna walk us through in more detail on the data side. So in the performance management, I'll quickly share these 3 things. Outcome measure development is a very interesting process when you are trying to work with 5 or 10 different agencies, come to an agreement to develop an outcome measure, or even get them aligned with the target. So what we do is that we do our own research. We have a lot of policy shop. We make a proposal on the outcome measure or on the target. Then we have 5 or 6 agencies kind of debate it out. Within out of that work, we come up with an agreement. Okay, this is a reasonable target. This is the outcome measure. So an agency meeting. So these are the basic stuff. I think almost everybody goes through that goes through the major development process. I'm gonna focus next 2 minutes on the data collection process. With the 192 measures, what we did in the past is that we have 5-year trend and we set the target. But when it comes to addressing the problem, it did not go too far. So by that, usually those measures, they were tied to one particular agencies. And it's rarely that one agency have 100% impact on one issue. So let's say, speaking of, let's say infant mortality, even though target was tied under one agency, but there are 5 different agencies who are working on it. So the way we started doing our data collection processes in governor's office, first for sure, trend over time, that's the particular, typical, that's how we present outcome measure with the target. What we wanna know from Washingtonian point of view is who is impacted by the issue. Whether we wanna get the data granularity from race and ethnicity point of view. Some measure maybe gender matters. For some measure maybe age group matters. So that's how we start peeling the layer that when we bring in Washingtonians, we have already done our analysis, which particular group is affected by it. And number 3 is we have never done that before on a state level. We do at an agency level. Location, where do they live? So every outcome measure or driver we present, it's going to have a 3 different layer: demographic profiles and the location. Because when we do result review, we bring in people from that county or that demographic profile to address how it is impacting them. This is one of the chart we are experimenting with. So we will have a county, we will have outcome measure 5-year trend, it'll have a target. Whether it's a DEI, gender, but it'll be a different demographic profile. This is again, that's the simple chart I showed you before. Every outcome, every indicator chart will be replaced by this. So we are still kind of doing user testing. Whole point is that when we are talking about outcome measure or any sort of measure, we should be talking about who is impacted by it and where do they live. In Washington, our geography is very diverse. East and West, we have totally different issues. So we are trying to bring that component into our statewide discussion. Beyond that, operation level, I think our state agency do pretty good. I'll take 1 more minute and quickly rush through it. So this is one of the meeting. In a result review, governor was asking, Omari MLE a question regarding re-entry. During that meeting, we previously were measuring re-entry measure for the last 6 years. We were talking about why DOC, Department of Correction, is not meeting its target. After the meeting, we found out even though the target or the outcome measure was assigned to one particular agencies, but it's actually the work of a lot of different agencies, and half of them weren't even on the table. So we are, and out of that, what came out, 2 agencies, they hired the same staff. So a lot of good things are coming out. That's how we know we are seeing some good sign that our system is working. That's the last example I'll share. Infant mortality. We have been tracking and discussing infant mortality rate in Washington, for the last several years. What was missing is that nationwide, Washington State is doing really good. We are 5th in the nation. But when you look into our Black communities, our Native American communities, infant mortality rate is very, very high. Instead of talking about state mortality rate, we hone on to these two group, that what are we doing to increase their performance. So this, we have never done that before. Now we are tailoring the discussion with the agencies to that level, to actually with the people who are impacted. With that, I think I already used more than my time. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much to all of our esteemed panelists. We have time for 2 or 3 questions, so let me hand it over to you all. Paul, you have, I think, right here. Was your hand up, or you're just stretching your hand? Well, I do have a general question for the panelists. You have very interesting and innovative projects that you're all working on, but inherent with this change process, there are challenges, I imagine. And if you could talk about some of the opposition or challenges that you may have faced as you put forth and worked on these projects, I think it would help us understand some of the things that you've had to face in getting to this point.
Well, I could address that not so much from the presentation that I gave, but I'm in an organization now where we are having to essentially change the wheel of the tire as we're driving down the road. One of the biggest challenges is that you still have to keep doing the work that you've been tasked with, but having to make some of these major changes in an organization. And one of the biggest problems is people expect results now, and it's very difficult to keep producing and working from day to day and do the changes. And so I think one of the biggest challenges and the biggest things that we've had to do is communicate to various levels of oversight that the change may not happen as quickly as they'd like to see it, and that you have to take it in a very orderly, stepwise fashion in order to implement the change. And it's hard to get patience from people, but that's really, you have to sell them that you need to do it in an orderly fashion, and that if you try to do it and just ram it down people's throats, you're going to end up failing in the long run. And so it's really that communication effort as you're dealing with all the constituencies to make sure they understand that you have to do it in a methodical way.
Anyone else want to answer that?
Sure. So one of the problems I deal with management, especially executive level, is that they're all excited to get going, and they want to start handing out the hammers to start building the houses. And I like action. I like moving things along, and when I try to slow it down because I want to ask questions, that's where I honestly will get a lot of resistance, is the asking of the questions, because we have sometimes management executives have a bias towards action, which is great, but and this is along those risks lines, but if the risk is also great, you may have run right into that risk. If there's a risk of 6 months of rework and $1 million of rework, maybe taking 3 weeks to ask some questions is worth that risk, right? And that's more of a way to think about it instead of thinking, oh, asking these questions is a waste of time. So I think it's, if your project's 2 weeks, run away with it. It's a 1 day of rework. So it's kind of there's an equation between how much time should I take up front to really analyze and how much is the risk of rework and the problems that I have.
Hi, can you just elaborate a little bit more on how you can identify unrealized risk within a data set that you obtain or you have available?
What we were looking at was quality assurance compliance with an overall regulation or requirement standard that was out there. We had looked, in our case, we had, the audit results would characterize things as a priority 1, priority 2 finding, or an observation. So there was a tiered process there that we could use for ranking and of issues. But overall, what we found was it really didn't matter so much how they were ranked, but as we looked at the statistics, it was the overall number of issues that they had. And so we quantify those, we just add them up and put those in as the dependent variable of the ordinary least squares model, and then ran the other independent variables against that.
And can you do something similar as part of a planning stage of just any projects in general?
What we were using were assessment results. And we had, as I said, we had 555 audit reports, so we had a lot of that. That's not always going to happen, but a lot of organizations do internal assessments, and they have some of those. This was really designed to compare one organization with another rather than a single organization. So it was really an inter-organizational type comparison.
Thank you.
I think one more question.
So this had to do with e-governance. I was curious, were you just discussing the front end and the web interfaces? Because what we've encountered is when we put the interface out, we get swamped. And we need systems that actually move all of that information around and empower folks to, to get the job done, or what we found is on the tail end, our dashboards, our metrics don't say what we'd like them to say.
Yeah, that's precisely the problem, because I think there's a disconnect between what citizens would expect and there's a lot, and what is put out there, because there's a lot of work being done at the back end, especially when you're integrating the systems. And those in IT, know how much work, but then once you put it out, thinking that once you put it out, the citizens will definitely want to use it. Sometimes there's disappointment because the citizens might be expecting something different. I think there's not proper communication. First of all, involving the citizens in what you want to, what information you want to put out would be helpful. That is not done, so it comes as a surprise to them. And then a lot of times there's really no proper guide to use the websites. There's a lot more that we could do in terms of communication. And this is not just e-government, just overall performance communication. We're all so focused on the internal communication and to legislatures, but then what about communication to the citizens, right? So yes, there is. We really don't measure the back end. We measure only the front end with the citizens, but that's also important, right? The citizen interaction. So.
All right, thank you, everyone. Let's give us our panelists another round of applause.
Okay, so to conclude the conference, we have 4 things we have to do. Okay? Not hard. First, you have an evaluation instrument in your folder, and we'd appreciate everybody filling that out, dropping it in the box when you leave. But we're not near leaving yet. We're going to take some time for lunch, et cetera, and to wrap up. Secondly, we can do a little drawing from the Massachusetts Developmental Disabilities group. So.
We'll have Mark pull the ticket, so we're not biased here. I pulled Brian's thing.
Want to explain what they get?
Oh, yes. So the winner gets this nice framed picture of the goat.
Wow.
Go ahead and pull.
Right, okay, so, Brian Elms has left, so there's no, right? No chance we're going to award it to him, right? Okay, so I'm going to just pull somebody's card out of here and, okay. Sue Wolf Fordham. Sue. Come on up. Now, I know Sue is a Patriots fan.
Actually, this is from my husband because I got invited to the Crafts House once and I turned it down, and he's mad.
Oh, okay.
I'm mad too.
This,
Congratulations.
okay. Okay, the third thing is, we're going to do a little exercise. So you all have these packets of cards, stack of cards that we distributed, and Mallory's going to put one on each table that's got a number on it. So what we'd like you to do over lunch is kind of argue out between yourselves what are the priority cards, which 35 would be, or you could substitute some wild cards in there for a total of 35. There are 4 wild cards. And then that becomes deck A, and then B are the ones that you could, deck A is the ones you consider absolutely essential to a performance measurement and improvement program. Deck B are the ones that you consider, nice, optional. Maybe you can operate the program without it. You could apply it to an agency that one of you, represent, or multiple people at the table represent, or you could do it in a kind of, generic way. Then what we're going to do later on, you hand in decks A and B labeled like 1A, 1B, or 11A, 11B, so we keep the 2 parts together. We will tabulate those, and we will indicate what the differences are. So we're going to get back to you with a little study as to what agreement there was and what disagreement there might have been between these. So it might give you some sense of what to prioritize in a way. And these are based on a survey of basically dozens, I could say hundreds, but let's say dozens of manuals, plans that are out there, and we're trying to reconcile the different terminologies at different points, bring them together, and in some way that is kind of a meta study of what's out there, but in a practical way that could be used in your organizations, in classrooms, just by individuals, in coming up with these plans. So you'll find that the decks are divided into 4 parts. Spades are planning strategically. Diamonds, building capacities for measuring and improving services. Clubs, learning for performance improvement. And hearts, engaging partners to maintain and build momentum. And then we'll ask you at the conclusion of lunch and this exercise, and before everybody leaves, did you have trouble coming to consensus? What did you think was uniformly essential? And what did you write on the wild cards? And could this plan be applied to different types of organizations and levels of government? And we'll just do that quickly at the end, okay? So, with your promise, your collective promise to do all of those things, we can now go have lunch. Okay, thanks.